So I've been sitting here doing some stuff for my business. I'm sorry for the noise. I have stuff printing because I run a 3D printing business. But I'm sitting here listening to, I guess, what was part of the culture war on Friday with Tim Pool, where he had a couple of historians on, and they had said some things that I wanted to argue with, but I figured, I'll let it go. I'll let it go. I mean, they're stupid takes, but they're not terribly bad. And then they start talking about the revolution. And the takes get worse and worse and worse. And then suddenly, somehow, we sent Ben Franklin over to England to get representation in Parliament, which never happened. Ben Franklin was in England to turn what was a private colony, Pennsylvania, into a royal colony. That's what he was trying to do. You ever wonder why Ben Franklin's son was the governor of New Jersey? Because it went from being a private colony to a royal colony, and they needed a royal governor, and that's where Ben Franklin's son came in. Ben Franklin was not a patriot until Boston pulled their Tea Party. Now, what you guys probably don't know, because you probably weren't taught it, was there were other Tea Parties in the United States. The ships meant for New York didn't land, didn't unload their tea, they left. The ships meant for Philadelphia were turned around at the city of Chester. They were stopped in Chester and forced back down the Delaware River. The ships that landed in Charleston got impounded. But Boston destroying the private property of a government-owned business, well, they caused a fucking shitstorm. And hey, lo and behold, here's the most famous American who wasn't even an American yet. He was a British citizen. We were British citizens until they turned around and said, guess what? You're British subjects. That was a lot of our problem leading up to the Revolution. Although you can say that George Washington started the first actual World War. We call it the French and Indian War in the United States. Everywhere else it's called the 7 Years' War. Look at where it was fought. It was a world war, and it all started in western Pennsylvania when a Virginian invaded Pennsylvania to go yell at the French. But that's all besides the point. That's a terrible digression. The point is, Ben Franklin was not in England seeking to make the individual colonies be represented in Parliament. That is not why he was there. Nobody went to England to seek representation in Parliament. No individual was dispatched for that purpose. In fact, you have to wait until the First Continental Congress to even get to a point where we're sitting there going, we really should have representation. And that didn't work. The king said no. With the Second Continental Congress, we sent out an olive branch petition. The king said no. He called us rebels and said we were in a state of rebellion. But we didn't send Ben Franklin to England to make any of the colonies part of Parliament. So there's one point. One point that really pissed me off. But, I'm not some well-known commentator on these subjects. When it comes to French assistance in the revolution, you forget Spain also helped. But it was monetary assistance. Monetary assistance. Same kind of shit we're doing right now with Ukraine. But hey, fun fact from history, we bankrupted France. So look forward to that, my fellow Americans. Because if we keep bankrolling Ukraine in their losing war, we're going to be bankrupted. We're already bankrupt. Think about it. How many billions of dollars have we sent to that country? Hell, it's more American in terms of cash flow from Congress than any individual state that is already part of our union. It gets more government assistance from the United States government than any state, protectorate, military base, or otherwise. You probably forget, we have protectorates. Puerto Rico is a protectorate. American Samoa, the American Virgin Islands. Guam. They're not states, but they're ours. And the people who live there are granted all the rights and privileges of citizens of the United States. They have American passports. But, fuck if you guys know that. Fuck if you pay attention. But this guy sitting there going, well, France helped us win. Well, kind of. But not really. French military forces did pretty much nothing for us. Until we trapped Cornwallis. And then they made this big show of marching from Rhode Island down to Virginia in their white fucking uniforms. And that's just the land troops. Their admiral, their navies. Well, they had a navy that was trying to help us out and failed miserably. And then ran off to the West Indies to try to do some shit. And failed miserably. Then another naval unit from the French came over and helped us at Yorktown. That's it. That is all the military assistance the French gave us. There were a lot of French officers and other officers from around the continent that came over to offer their assistance to the United States, because, hey, guess what? There's no war going on in France. These guys are professional soldiers, and they're expecting high ranks and a lot of money in return for their services. Some of them were brilliant. Others were trash. But they were not sent by individual nations. They were found by people we had in France and sent over. Oh, hey, guess what? That's where Ben Franklin was. Not in England, but in France. John Jay was over there. Most people forget John Jay even exists. Most of you don't know that he wrote the most boring essays in the Federalist Papers. My God, John Jay's essays are boring as hell. But, once again, besides the point, the French didn't even know if they wanted to support us until Benedict Arnold. And Germantown. So, the battles of Saratoga, so Bemis Farm and whatnot, where the Americans would have lost if we left it to General Horatio Gates, but Benedict Arnold, being the prima donna that he was, and also the face of courage that he was, successfully led the forces in the field to defeat the British and cause Burgoyne to surrender. And George Washington's incredibly complex, almost defeat of the British just outside of Philadelphia in 1777, after they had taken the city. If we had not stopped at Cliveden, we'd have swept the British from the field. But it was determined that we needed to deal with those 140 redcoats holed up in a fucking mansion. Instead of just leaving a force to keep them inside the fucking mansion, nope, everything had to stop. So we dealt with those fuckers. And that caused this incredibly complex, timed out plan to fall apart, which is why we lost the Battle of Germantown. But between Benedict Arnold and George Washington's military prowess at the Battle of Germantown, the French said, you know what? We are officially going to say we're supporting you, although they'd been doing it from the shadows for years. But a lot of what I was hearing from these two people trying to explain things to Tim, some of it I agree with, some of it just outright bullshit. Outright bullshit. Some of it, they pussyfoot around it. Like, oh, the South didn't have the right to secede. Actually, if Thomas Jefferson had a hand in the Constitution of that individual place, like Virginia and Tennessee, they actually did have the right to secede. The constitutions we see now are post-Civil War constitutions, and I fucking hate using the term Civil War for the war between the states. I fucking hate using that term. It wasn't a civil war. It was a war between two nations, and the North beat the fucking shit out of the South using some horrible tactics. The South was conquered. They actually had to rewrite their state constitutions to be allowed back into the Union. That is, until a fucking corrupt election in 1876, which ended Reconstruction, gave the Republicans the White House, and allowed secessionist Democrats back into government. But by all means, oversimplify incredibly complex topics because, it's easier that way. And then you get people who know fucking nothing, talking as if they know everything. Telling me Ben Franklin was in England seeking representation in Parliament, although he never did that. Idiots telling me that, Southern secession and their constitution had nothing to do with slavery, although it has everything to do with slavery. If you do not understand the society at the time of the situation you're talking about, you don't know anything about the situation you're talking about. History is not simply remembering dates and what happened on those dates. It's a lot more complex than that. But don't let me tell you, apparently I know nothing. I'm glad Tim is actually getting historians on there, although they seem revisionist to me, and revisionists are fiction writers, not historians. And don't give me the bullshit that revisionist history is all history, because, when we get new information, we revise it. That's not how it works. Revisionist defines a school of history that takes modern thought patterns, modern understandings, and imprints that on something from several hundred years ago that had no inclination or idea that society would be the way it is today. Taking your modern sensibilities and placing it on historic figures. That's not how it works. We didn't drop the bomb on Japan to show the Russians we had it. The Russians knew we had it. They had spies in the fucking Manhattan Project. They were well informed about what the fuck we were doing and what it was capable of. We didn't need to drop it to show the Russians we had it. We dropped it to avoid 10 million casualties for the mainland invasion of Japan. 8 million of which were Japanese civilians. But fuck, what do I know? I'm not a revisionist historian. I'm not even a post-revisionist. I am a traditional historian. That's my school of history. I need primary documents. Not secondary, not somebody's fucking essay from 2 years ago talking about something that happened 90 years ago. No, primary documents. Contemporary sources. Ben Franklin was in England to get parliamentary representation. Fuck. God damn it, you fucking idiot. Go back and reread fucking history.